G'day guys, this video is going to be regarding the IRRInet ACE programming from scratch, and we'll get straight into it. So first step that you want to do is have one of these little documents with you. These are found on the Dropbox, and this just is a blank document. I've pre-filled this one here with all the information that I need for the programming that I'm going to do today, and you just need to fill out these little sections with the specifics regarding the project that you will be working on. So there's two methods to programming a IRRInet ACE from scratch. The first method, and the simplest method, is if you have a controller exactly the same on the system already, you can copy and paste, and for this one my site ID is going to be 7, and I will just call this one a Brisbane Test ACE, and that is exactly done. So this will be set up exactly the same, and if I was to go into my IP conversion table, that's already selected for that one. The ladder application will be done, and the network file will be done as well. So everything from the original controller will be copied over. But for this instance, we're going to program it completely from scratch with a new STS project, and we'll go through the process from the start. So I'm just going to pre-fill some information. I know my system address is 500, and the MDLC password for this project is Parkland, all capitals. Okay, so my controller is an IRRInet ACE 3640. I'm going to select the IRRInet subfolder, IRRInet ACE, CPU 3640, left click once, and then drag the controller into the root directory. My site ID is 7, and we can just call it anything we like for now. Okay, double click on your controller, and we're going to modify all the configuration settings to match with what our controls required to communicate to the server. So if the ports aren't used, I always like to leave them as RTU to RTU, so that way I can connect to the controller at a later stage. Never use RS-Link 19 as a leftover port. Even if it's not being used, don't leave it as RS-Link 19. That is a direct communication to the server, and it is a reserved link with a priority assigned to it. So if that's left there, it will always try to talk over RS-Link 19. Next step is to enable the Ethernet. I'm going to be using a router here in the office to talk back to the server. If you are going to be doing a PIU, just double click on the serial port and check your RTS is always on. Next step is to define the modules that are required. In this case, I've got 232 DODI modules, and the tricky thing with a DIDO module is, unfortunately, you have to define these manually, otherwise they will all default to input elements. So I'll disable the auto recognition, and we will select our 32 DODI modules. In this case, we're doing 1616 on the first module, and we're going to do 32 out on the second module. And I'm also doing a low tier power supply, and because we have the auto recognition disabled, we need to configure our power supply type. So click on the advanced tab, go down to the power supply type, click the drop down arrow, and in this case I'm picking my DC 12 volt low tier, and we can hit OK. And that's it for the standard configuration. We will still need to select our system file and go to our IP conversion table manager, and I'm going to put an IP address in that the ACE can talk to. Site 1 is the server address, line 1 is our defined link for Ethernet, and I should be able to just copy and paste my IP address that I've reserved earlier. Hit save and give it a file name. So I want to assign this to the ACE, so I'll select the tick. We can hit save. Now if we get back to the system, we'll need to define a network file. Now the generic will be missing the site ID for 1, so we'll need to define a new one. We can left click our row 1, we can delete this row, and we will just select site ID 1, link ID will be line 1, and our second link ID will be that IRRInet 19, and this is a way of tricking the system into thinking that it talks to the server directly via line 1. So select OK, we're going to pick our network file that we've just created, hit the tick and hit OK. Disregard. We'll hit the close button. If we go back to the application programmer, now that we've defined our modules, we'll need to recompile our application. Now, by default, this will be linked to IRRInet 19, so we want to change that to line 1. So the first step is to hit this little database tab down the bottom left, go to our system tables, and there'll be a table in here called site table. Double click it, and you'll see our site name center for site ID 1 is listed as IRRInet 19. We want to change that to line 1. You can close that, save it, and we'll just hit our compile button. We can close that out, and now if we go to our download, we can see all the files. Unfortunately, we cannot download our network file at the start, because the network file has to be downloaded with a link ID associated with it. We need the site configuration to be downloaded first. So we'll deselect our network file. Just before we start, we'll just double check our communication setup. By default, the IRRInet ACE in the 2 serial ports, the S1 and S2. S1 will be at 9600 and S2 will be at 115.200. Now, you're more than happy to download it at 9600, but in order to get it at a decent speed, select 115.200, and we're going to connect up our cable into S2. Just before we do a final download is to go to our application version, select 8.61, and we'll just hit the download button, select local, and download all those files. we can hit close and go back into setup, communication setup, and change our board rate back to 9600. Hit the apply and OK. And if this is on a server with controllers that have multiple network paths, we will need to download the network file. But if the controller talks back to the server directly and all the other controllers talk directly, then the network file actually isn't required. In this case, we've got the cold restart already without a network file, so we won't worry about it. You may also end up with an error light on your controller. To clear the error log, just go to error logger, select our local, and just hit start. You may end up with a user application error. That's normal, and just hit close. And if we go back into ICC, we can hit a little refresh button. Everything should be up to date. We should be able to hit the download button, hit yes, and that's it. Good job.